It's all things MMA on KCLR and for Scoreline.ie. My name is Ken McGuire, joined as always on screen and in your ears by Team Rhino Kilkenny's Miles Price. How you doing? How are things?
Hey Ken, not too bad, thanks. Good to see the sun back out again. It was pretty miserable the last few days.
It has been, and hopefully it gets to stick around for a few days as well. We did all manner of predictions for UFC 279 last week, and in some kind of weird parallel universe, all of the predictions went out the window because the majority of the fight cards seemed to go out the window. On Friday or Saturday, we had major backstage scuffles where we saw a press conference being cancelled for security reasons. We saw Khamzat Chimaev come in like 7.5 pounds or something over the welterweight limit of 171 for his headline fight with Nate Diaz. That ultimately got scrapped. Then we see Nate Diaz gets thrown into the welterweight mix with Tony Ferguson. So Lee feels like he's robbed, goes on to lose a split decision win as well in his fight. And then we see Khamzat get Kevin Holland in a catchweight bout, despite the fact that Kevin Holland weighed in nearly 10 pounds lighter than Khamzat, and get completely out wrestled. How was your UFC 279 weekend? That sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, but I think it's entertaining for the fans though, isn't it? Like, from an outside perspective, like we all like indulging in a little bit of drama and carnage. So I think that was exciting news across the board for fans.
Wasn't it a little funny though that like the first thing that the UFC come out about and go, we're just going to shut this down. This isn't a conspiracy theory. We haven't arranged this in order to have Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson do their thing. We haven't arranged it to get Khamzat an easy win against. Not that anyone would be an easy win, but it turned out to be an easy win against Kevin Holland. We haven't screwed anything out of or anybody out of anything. But give me your thoughts. Give me your thoughts first on the missed weight at welterweight. We've spoken a lot about the professionalism and managing weight cuts and things like that. With Khamzat Chimaev, the UFC have a kind of a rare breed of an athlete on their hands, in that he's almost bar Gilbert Burns, he's almost walked through everybody who he's faced under UFC contract. He's still undefeated as a fighter, and to turn up on the scales for a main event on a pay-per-view with a lot of eyes on you, with a lot of money riding on it, and then completely and utterly disregard the rules and the preparation for the competition. Like he didn't even look like he was bothered when he got up in the scales, and they knew obviously before the ceremonial weigh-ins and the official weigh-ins that his weight wasn't going to come to pass at all. But to do it in such a manner, what are your thoughts on
it? What I thought straight away was, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What I thought was straight away is that one, Khamzat definitely has issues with weight cutting as it is, hence why he goes from welterweight to middleweight. Two is that kind of evidences of that is like if you look at the last Embedded, I think it was, where he fought Gert Burns, like, he was going through a pretty drastic cut there. Like, he wasn't doing very well. And then also, I think that maybe a doctor told him to stop. Now, how much of an influence he and his team had on that decision, the way if he's having a tough cut, says he can't make it, expresses that he doesn't eat that with the team. Look, I've had enough. I can't go through another cut mentally right now or physically. Then you could easily kind of go and play the doctor's card, go to the doctor and go, look, he's had a haircut, blah, blah, blah. Doctor's written something off. Next thing it looks good for him then, doesn't it? Could have been that involved too, but as you said, I'm kind of going towards that side of things because as you finally put it, and a few others have finally put it to me as well, is that he did look pretty okay on the scales. He didn't look drawn out. He didn't look anyway guilty or anything like that. He more looked like, well, I don't give a fuck what you think. I got away with it, and I'd say that's probably more along the lines of what happened. Or maybe he didn't take the fight as seriously as what he should have. I know Darren Till was saying it on the embedded, like, oh, he's training harder than ever, and people are saying that, is he taking this fight lightly? Maybe he did take the fight lightly. Of course, his teammate is going to say that, and he's going to say whatever needs to be said to protect his teammate. But maybe he didn't take Nate Diaz as seriously as he should have. Hence the weight cut, you know.
Well, it turned out to be an interesting wind up. I mean, we see he still gets to fight. I presume that he needed to forfeit whatever he was going to get on the pay-per-view side of things, or the percentage of his purse to Kevin Holland. But then he goes out and he shoots just after the glove touch, and then bounces Kevin Holland around the mat for 2.5 minutes before he gets to submit him. What's the next move for him? Is it to stay at middleweight?
I'd say he's in this kind of in this position where he's pretty flexible with the UFC. I'd say, he's kind of going down that McGregor road where he has a lot of power as to what he wants to do. If he wants to be a middleweight and fight for the title, he's probably going to get that opportunity. Welterweight fights for the title, he's probably going to get that opportunity. I think the UFC are probably going to strike while the iron's hot now and give him like a title shot, to be honest, of either middleweight or welterweight. But I'm suspecting welterweight, really, you know.
Oh, a title shot at welterweight. So that would be Khamzat and Leon Edwards. Which, if having watched Khamzat and Kevin Holland, I would fear a little for Leon Edwards in that regard. As much as I like Leon Edwards, you kind of get the feeling that Khamzat's just going to steamroll whoever's in his way. So go on.
And I think that the UFC would be bold enough as well to make that the next fight as well. Yeah. And like he'll overstep Bilal, overstep Tyrone or Usman's rematch. Yeah. I think the figures will speak for themselves, because Khamzat wins the title, which he probably would against Leon. Like, it's just a better story, isn't it, for like the UFC? If Khamzat wins, which he would, I'd say, and then he has to fight, the ex-champ is coming back to regain his title. It's just a bigger fight, I think. You know, how do you feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, it's you put him in a title picture, I think anybody is going to watch it. Whether or not the UFC would be that quick to disregard what had happened, there'll be a lot of fighters that are pissed, yes. But at the end of the day, the UFC kind of does what the UFC does. And it's their show, it's their call. If that's how they see they're going to do it, and if that's how they're going to turn a buck out of it, then fair enough. Does it open up the possibility, or does it further the possibility of discussions about reviewing where weight classes lie, or a shift in a couple of pounds one way or the other for welterweight, or a shift in a couple of pounds one way or the other for middleweight? Like, a lot of these guys. And I don't know how you approach it yourself when it comes to a fight week. But if you're weighing in at 170, there's every possibility that Khamzat goes back into the cage against, whether it was against Nate Diaz or whether it was against Kevin Holland, and he's 190, 195, 200 on that mark. With I suppose with kind of weight cutting starting to become an issue for both male and female fighters, and we've seen a couple of shock stories over the last year of people coming in, 3, 4, and 5 pounds out, and the body's starting to shut down. They might not quite be the fighter for the next class up as it is. Like, there's a fair gulf between welterweight and middleweight, but does the conversation need to start happening sooner rather than later for that kind of middle ground between the two?
Well, I think the UFC. I think the conversation for added weight classes and better fighter pay is a discussion that should have happened 10 years ago. Like, I mean, like, it's not like a new topic. Like, this is something that is like so blatantly obvious in regards to fighter health and fighter. There is like it comes down to those two things, doesn't it? It's respecting the fighters and their worth, and respecting their health. And the UFC don't do either. They don't care about fighters' worth. They don't care about a fighter's value, and they don't give a shit, excuse me, French, about their health. Because if they did, they'd add more weight classes. Why aren't you adding more weight classes? Oh, because of this, because of that. But what's the sacrifice? What's the sacrifice? That small sacrifice may be whatever it is for an individual's health. Not much. You should do that. How about giving a little bit more of the pie of the billion-dollar industry you have to treating your workers a little bit better? Because any major corporation understands that treating your workers from the very bottom of your roster to the top is super important for longevity. So I really do feel like, as you know, it doesn't seem like a possibility now, but I think the UFC will come to crash and burn eventually, or there'll be another organization, or there'll be so many big organizations that will be spread too so thin in regards to quality of athletes that the UFC will very much be downgraded in value in future years because of these two huge things. Like, you know, they're massive, like they're huge. You know, you can't get away with treating your athletes and your roster of athletes like crap. You just can't do it, like, you know. And it comes down to their health with the weight classes and their pay with their respect and their value.
Moving on from there, the big event, the main event, became Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson. Secretly, I think this was the fight that a lot of people didn't know that they really wanted until it was announced on the card, and they were like, "Oh my god, that makes way more sense." How these guys haven't fought in the UFC in all the years at lightweight or welterweight is a little bit of a mystery. We spoke last week about how kind of trying to figure out a path for Tony Ferguson afterwards, when it was in relation to a loss to Khamzat, because it could have been a very different. Or sorry, Khamzat was with Nate Diaz, would have been a loss against Lee, but now that it's a loss against Nate Diaz, and the form that they both showed, like Tony Ferguson looked like a kind of a OG style of Tony Ferguson, ready to go to town, ready to work the legs, ready to take the licks across the 4 rounds. He got caught with the guillotine, but that's the nature of the game. Both of them super high skilled on the jiu-jitsu side of things. And Nate Diaz, I don't know, like there was like wicked showmanship between the two of them. Diaz was doing his thing, kind of moving through the rounds as if he's not arsed, but secretly he's arsed and he's going for the win. He gets the last fight of his contract, declares that he's a free man. He's got the new fight promotion starting up. There's a lot of things that are going to happen next. For what you saw of Diaz and Ferguson, how did the fight sit with you?
Well, I think it worked out perfectly for Nate Diaz, because the UFC were kind of setting him up for that kind of the bad fall to devalue him before he moves on to do his own things, because they haven't got control of him anymore. Yeah, so I think
you've been the bad guy, so we're going to put you up against our new pit bull. You're going to get smashed. You're going to leave with your head hanging. Whereas now it's like, you know, he gets to give the finger to the UFC walking out the door going, "I told you guys."
Yeah, exactly. So there's a part of me that thinks so as well, that he mightn't leave the UFC, you know, that he could just, like, you know, in the height of the main event and winning, and he might move on to something else in the UFC now. Who knows? Like, you know, who knows? Like I think he'll definitely run his new promotion and stuff like that. Like, I mean, that looks good. Yeah. But in general, I think the fight went really well. I think Tony looked really good, but I think Tony is a little bit. I'd be a little. I was kind of talking about this last week as well. I'm a little bit worried about Tony in regards to, not worried, like, you know, obviously I don't have anything to do with him. Like, you know, I think he should be concerned, and people around him should be concerned about finding further purpose after he competes, because he's not a young pup anymore. He's like 37 going on 38. he's definitely past his best days. His best days were when he was meant to fight Khabib for the title. They're gone now. You know, it's that simple. Like, yeah, he's going to show flashes of the Tony Ferguson of old, but at the end of the day, it is a young man's game, and some lads do age a lot differently than others in regards to the fight game. Just because Glover Teixeira won a light heavyweight title later on in his career doesn't mean that anybody else could do that. Like, there's a lot of factors to come into why you can age correctly and still compete at the highest level as well. I think Tony seems to me like it's fighting or it's nothing, you know? Yeah. Like, I think he needs to find something outside of fighting that's going to really tick the boxes that satisfy the fighter side of him as well, you know? And that mightn't necessarily be coaching either, you know? Might have to be something else, because Tony's always kind of come across as a little bit nutty, you know? He's entertaining because he's not exactly the social norm of a character, is he? You know, so I think that he looked really good, but he still definitely needs to put a lot of thought into what he's going to do after his career, because you can see that his ego isn't the same either. You know, he hasn't got that stern bloodlust kind of attitude, you know, and that does fade over time. You know, athletes that does shed over time, and Tony looked almost like, you know, he was picking Nate up, he was hugging him, he was smiling, he was walking around the cage. He was happy to be there. He wasn't happy to be the ruthless winner, you know? Yes. And unfortunately, that happens in a fight game, you know? So I think that's kind of where he's at now, you know?
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens with it. As far as I know, he has fights left on his contract. I'm not 100% sure, but as to whether those get exercised or not, there wasn't any kind of major announcement as to whether Ferguson would be staying put or go on, or does he need to pick up things. But he could certainly do with a win, whenever he fights again, presuming that he fights again for the UFC. Parking the UFC and stuff for there. I know there's a fight night this weekend with Corey Sandhagen is in action as well at bantamweight. And we'll probably look at that on the website online at Scoreline.ie. But given that we're heading into kind of a couple of busy weeks, Bellator are set to make a return to Dublin as well, the 3 Arena. 23rd of this month. Yeah. The headline event is a former fight partner of yours, Peter Queally, who gets a run out against Benson Henderson.
Right.
At one stage, you may have been in contention to meet. Any early thoughts on this one? Have you been keeping an eye?
I forgot I was meant to fight Ben Henderson. Jesus Christ, you have a better memory than I do about my own memory. Jesus Christ. How do I feel like that's going to go? That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that possibly. I think it's going to be a good fight, but I can't really see Peter coming out winning that fight, to be honest with you. You know, I think it'll be a tough fight, but Peter is very good at kind of like pulling fights out of the bag.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And but I just don't think he's going to have the, like, look, I'll put it to you this way, right? I thought he won the fight.
Okay.
But Henderson versus Islam Mamedov. Do you know Islam Mamedov? He kind of hangs around. My mate, my buddy. Well, but he hangs around with like Khabib and all those lads, and he fought Ben Henderson there a while ago, and Ben Henderson bet him, you know.
Yes.
And now what I will say is that Islam Mamedov is a fucking machine. Like, he's a bit like, I used to spar him a lot.
Yeah.
And he's an animal, bro. Like, he's an animal.
Like, it was close. It was a split decision in the wind up. That's
it was close.
January.
I thought that he won, personally, Islam, but still, that's the level you're talking about. And I just feel like that Peter is good, but I don't think Peter's that level. I think he's the most promoted guy in Bellator, Irish Bellator. Like, he's like the poster boy for Ireland. But I don't think that he's at the same level as Ben Henderson. But look, he has pulled fights out of the bag. He's tough. He's resilient. But
Yeah.
I think that's his best attributes, his toughness and his resilience. I don't think skill wise he has what it takes to beat Ben. That's what I'm saying. With all due respect, like, you know, I know he's a previous opponent and all that stuff, and I do admire his grittiness, I admire his resilience, I admire his toughness, but I think that Ben Henderson has resilience and toughness, but he also has the skills that do slightly. Yeah, I think it's not that Peter doesn't have skills. I just think that Ben has more skills and across the board as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's this card is for Bellator Dublin or Bellator 285, Henderson versus Queally. There's a load of Irish guys that are going to be involved in the card. Kieran Clark get to fight on the main card at 145 against George Sassou of France. Liam McCourt is back on the card as well, taking on Brazil's Diana Silva. Brian Moore meets Arivaldo Silva. Derek Kelly gets his second pro fight at 155 against Kai Stevens. Carl Moore is on the card as well. And the co-main event should be an interesting one, both for US and for Irish audience as well. Yoel Romero and Melvin Manhoff at 205.
Oh wow! I got look, inside thing, right? I'm telling you right now, Manhoff is gonna get destroyed.
You reckon?
I'm telling you. Oh man, I when I was over at UFD gym, right, and in Dusseldorf,
yeah,
Manhoff was doing like a couple of sparring sessions there, and I walked in one day. I didn't know this was happening. I just went downstairs, and next thing, Melvin Manhoff is in sparring with all the lads in the gym, and I'm not messing with you, right? The lads that were sparring against him, you'd expect. All I'm going to say is that you'd expect someone of Manhoff's caliber to be destroying them. Be the Lord Jesus, boy, he was in the air every 2 seconds, getting hopped out of it, wrestling wise. Like, I'm not messing with you. It's like either Manhoff gets a serious knockout or he is getting smashed wrestling wise. That's not sugarcoating the thing either. Like, I'm telling you.
Okay, there's our first banker for the new season. Yoel Romero to destroy Melvin Manhoff at Bellator Dublin. It's the 23rd of December. It's a Friday night. You'll find tickets online at Ticketmaster. You get the details of the card online later this week at Scoreline.ie. You can check Bellator.com as well for details. Miles, before we let you go, anything of interest or anything of note for you for the week ahead, or if people are looking to reach out to you, how can they do so?
You can just reach out to me on Team Rhino Kilkenny on Instagram there if you have any inquiries about the gym or just want to have an old chat or look.
Excellent. Can't beat a good old shot. On that note, he has been Miles Price of Team Rhino Kilkenny. I've been Ken McGuire for Scoreline.ie and KCLR, and we will do all of this again next week somewhere in the world. Good luck.